I want to start today by talking about a picture. This photo was taken at the opening of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. in 2016. In an interview last Sunday, former President Bush was asked about that hug and the reaction it caused. He replied by telling the story that after the event was over and he had gotten in the car, one of his daughters said, "Hey, you're trending." Reactions to that hug were spreading across social media like wildfire because people were so surprised that George Bush and Michelle Obama could be friends. Reflecting on the experience, President Bush said that he was shocked by people's surprise and that he thinks it's a problem people in this country are so polarized they can't imagine the two of them would be so close. I couldn't agree with him more. And yet, since that picture was taken, the divisions in this country have only gotten worse. At the heart of those divisions is our tendency to get so bound up by the things we believe to be true, our ideas about politics, faith, and social issues, that we start to distance ourselves from those who disagree with us, sometimes even going so far as to believe anyone on the opposing side of an important issue is our enemy. That's why people had such strong reactions when they learned of the friendship between Michelle Obama and George Bush. They just couldn't imagine someone from their team playing nicely with someone from the other team. This team mentality has gotten to the point where it seems like common ground is no longer possible, because when it comes to competing teams, there can only be one winner. So we tend to defend our team at all costs while doing everything we can to keep the other team from scoring any points at all. And God forbid we ever play nice with someone from the other side. Today, we are going to take a look at a familiar parable of Jesus that has a lot to say about how we are called to treat one another. But it is more than just the feel-good parable about good deeds that people often make it out to be. In fact, it contains a difficult but vital lesson for what it takes to bring healing and hope to our divided world. The parable begins with these words. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead." Now, I want to pause right here and point something out that is often overlooked in this story, but is super important. Jesus says nothing about the man who is on the side of the road. We don't know anything about him, except the fact that he has been beaten and left for dead. What is about to happen bears no reflection on him. What is about to happen is reflective of those who encountered him in his time of need. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So, likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now, unlike the victim in this story, these two men are clearly identified. Both of them are part of the religious elite and are supposed to be seen as models of faith. Now, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard interpretations of this story that include reasons why the priest and Levite walked by the man without offering aid. While some of those interpretations might be legitimate according to the religious laws and customs of the day, Jesus is about to make clear there is no justification for their unwillingness to care for the dying man. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him. And when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? As you likely know, Samaritans were enemies of the Jewish people. They were hated, distrusted, and could do nothing right. In fact, if a Samaritan did something, a lot of people just assumed it was the wrong thing to do. And there were likely some people who heard this parable and believed that the fact the Samaritan helped the man only proved more justification for the priest and Levite to walk on by. There was no room for nuance in the relationship between the Jewish and Samaritan communities. One side was good, the other side was bad. And to be clear, the lawyer who asked Jesus the originating question was a Jewish man. As extreme as this sounds, arguments like that happen in the modern world far too often. If people on one side of the theological, ideological, or political spectrum say something is right, people on the other side will often just assume it is wrong because they consider the source before they consider the facts. If the source is a theological, ideological, or political opponent, that has the tendency to shape our willingness to hear what they have to say. Sometimes we even dismiss them before they even say a word. I am afraid that we are at a place where if this parable were to play out today and someone from our side of things, someone on our team, heard that someone from the other side of things, someone on their team, provided aid and ongoing care to an injured person, we might wonder if they were up to something. That maybe they were trying to prove a point. So the better course of action would be to cross the other side of the road and leave the person to care for themselves. A recent study actually showed that people were more empathetic towards those in their own political party than those who were not. That people are more inclined to help or not help someone in need based on their political ideologies. In this current climate of increasing divisions and hostilities toward those who are different from us, I cannot help but wonder how we would answer the question, who is your neighbor? The reason the answer to that question is so important is because the call to love our neighbor as ourselves is at the core of our faith, which is why the lawyer asked Jesus the question in the first place. In order for him to live out the commandment to love his neighbor, he had to first know who his neighbor was. And the answer was as clear as it was shocking. The man in the story who got this right was the enemy of the man who asked the question. He was on the wrong team. The Samaritan was following the commandments of God better than the priest or the Levite. So the lawyer has a choice. Does he consider the source or does he consider the facts? If his answer is based on being true to his team, he has to defend the priest and the Levite so that his team doesn't look bad. If he accepts the fact that the Samaritan did the right thing, he is admitting that he has something to learn from those on the other team, even those who are his enemy. I am pretty sure that at this point in the story, the lawyer wished he'd never asked the question. What would you have done in that situation? Now, before you jump to your answer, I really do want you to pause and think about this. For example, have you ever defended someone on your side of the political aisle or theological perspective, even when you know deep down that what they have said or done was wrong? Have you ever made excuses for or just overlooked their behavior and said nothing for fear that if you called them out, it would look bad for your team or give the other side some kind of advantage? Have you ever dismissed the faithfulness of someone who disagrees with you about social or moral issues, believing that because they are on the other side of the issue, their faith is not as legitimate as yours? Have you ever been in the place where you struggled to accept that someone on the other side of politics, faith, or social issues might be right about something? Because if so, it may mean you or your side might be wrong? Here's the thing about parables. In order to get at what Jesus is trying to teach through them, we have to get beyond our tendency to view ourselves as the character that gets it right. Jesus didn't tell the parable of the Good Samaritan because he thought most people would do what the Samaritan did. He told it because we are more likely to do what the priest and Levite did. As uncomfortable as it is to do so, we've got to confess that there have been times when we have chosen not to help someone in need. When we've come up with reasons and justifications why we don't need to offer aid or care. When we've been more like the priest and the Levite than we might want to admit. We are also meant to see ourselves as the lawyer who asked the question, because before we can ever get to the place where we are willing to live out the commandment to love our neighbor, we have to first answer the question, who is my neighbor? Who did the right thing here? We are even meant to see ourselves as the person who was beaten and on the side of the road. After all, there will come a time when every single one of us needs the help of someone else. When you find yourself in that moment, how do you hope someone will treat you? Here is how the lawyer answered when Jesus asked him who acted like the neighbor in this story. He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." In his moment of truth, the lawyer did what we so often struggle to do. He chose truth over team, admitting that the Samaritan did the right thing. The lawyer's team got it wrong. His enemy's team got it right. The lawyer was willing to admit that reality, and what he learned from his enemy brought him closer to living out the great commandment. And here's the thing. Something we really need to pay attention to about this parable that we often leave out of the equation. The question Jesus asked wasn't, who is your neighbor? The answer to that question is obvious to the Christ follower. Everyone is our neighbor, and we are to love everyone as ourselves. The question Jesus asked the lawyer was, who acted like a neighbor? Who actually treated someone else the way they would want to be treated if they were in the same situation? The question wasn't just about attitude, it was about action. And when it comes to loving our neighbor, the message is as clear as it can be. Do no harm, either actively or passively. Here's how the Apostle Paul put it. And remember, he used to be one of those people who likely would have walked past the wounded man due to his team's understanding of the law. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves one another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Let's hang on that last sentence for just a moment. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Starting next week, we are going to shift our attention in this series from the foundations of why we are called to be a grace-filled community that is diverse by design to some very specific actions and behaviors that can help us live into the call of Jesus to become better neighbors. In the meantime, as we seek to be a reconciling presence in this often divided world, may we be a people who no longer merely asks who our neighbor is, but also asks, am I being a good neighbor to everyone I meet? In so doing, we may find that the reconciliation we seek is more within our reach than we ever thought possible. Amen.